Hjärtligt välkomna. Hi everyone. This seminar will be held on English. And me, Ali Reza Akomdi, a member of the Swedish Parliament from Centre Party, are hosting together with Mr. Magnus Berntsson from Christian Democrat Party. And we do this together in collaboration with UANI, United Against Nuclear Iran, and EJA, European Jewish Association. The report that are going to be presented later in the program is written, and the research is from UANI. And I'm not going to give any comments about that yet. I leave it to our panel of experts later. The first question I got today was, why is this seminar important? Was from a journalist. And I tried to formulate a good answer, but my answer was, we had 33 terrorist attacks done by Islamic Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, on European soil this past, especially 20 years. We have several attacks on Swedish soil. 1990 was a murder in Västerås on an Iranian person. Few months ago, we saw Swedish radio with reports IRGC was pointed out directly for involvement for terrorist activity, murder plot against Swedish Jews. I don't know if you have followed that reporting. We know that Swedish security police, SÄPO, is pointing out Iran together with Russia and China openly in their yearbook, year after year. And we have a new security situation in Europe because of Russian aggression war against Ukraine. I'm trying to give some context, as I think is important to have it with you. We have two Swedish citizens hostage in Iran right now. BBC Persian section sent me an official document a few days ago. In that document, it was clear that the Islamic Republic are trying to fabricate evidence against U1, for example. And we know that Islamic Republic have done this hostage taking to a business, hostage diplomacy, to gain benefit from Western countries. We have an alarming situation in Red Sea, as you know, with the Houthis. From Swedish side, we have sent it warship over there. The Middle East situation in total, Iraq with several Iranian militia groups. We have Syria. We have Israel-Palestine situation. The IRGC fingerprint is all over Hamas attack, 7th of October. We have the situation with Hezbollah in Lebanon, etc. But also inside Iran, we have over 20,000 in Iranian prisons right now. Many of them are subjected to torture and rape. For example, a few days ago, it came out some report also from BBC that was pointed out that 16-year-old Nikia was raped several times before she got murdered. 18 months ago now. We have executions of prisoners. We have several people standing in line to be executed. Toomaj Salehi, a famous rapper, is one of them, one of many. And a little bit about the situation inside Iran. As you know, 60% of the Iranian people are under 30. 80% is under 40. In the last election, in March, parliamentarian election, only 10% of the people voted, despite that the Iranian regime did everything they could to make people to participate in that election. And The financial situation is getting worse, especially through the sanctions that we are imposing against the Islamic regime. During the Shah's period, a dollar cost 70 rial, now is over 600,000 rial. So the financial situation is terrible. During these 18 months since Mahsa Amini was killed, we have seen a historic change of European policies against the Islamic Republic. If you look at the sanction list in November 2022, 11 persons was on the sanction list. Now is over 345 entities on the sanctions list. European Parliament has taken 4 resolutions, and the most special one, the most important one, is designation of our IRGC. But we see European Council with Joseph Borrell is doing everything they can to stop designation of IRGC. The reasons need a special seminar, but for now, I think we can say that if we want to have stability in the world, in the Middle East, if we want to stop refugee crisis, we need to take leadership in Europe. And this is our responsibility in Sweden, me and Magnus as members of the Swedish Parliament, to do everything we can to stop infiltration, to start with in our own country, but also contribute to European security and stability around the world. Because the world is getting smaller and smaller, and we need to make sure that we don't have any spill effects on our streets when something happens somewhere else. With that, I leave the floor to Mr. Magnus Berntsson.
Thank you so much, Alireza, and thank you for being here today. It is a dark time we live in, and we see the threat to the rule-based world order, not only from Iran, but also from countries like China and Russia. And we must see that these things are interconnected. I think Alireza gave a really good setting of what we want to talk about today and what we have our panelists here to speak about. But I want to mention a few things also. And I think it's time for having a clear view on what's going on. And that Iran is playing a very destructive role in the world is very clear. They use proxies in many places in the Middle East, not at least, but they treat also their own people in a terrible way, where especially young women has been both forced to do things that no one should be forced to do, and been in the end also people have been killed and people have been sentenced to death for things that justice is things that you should have the opportunity to do as a human being. They also play a crucial role actually in the conflict in Ukraine, where they give Russia one of their biggest military support, or the biggest military support when it comes to drones, but also ballistic missiles. And this is also something that needs to be mentioned very clearly. And of course, we also saw the direct attack from Iran to Israel in a few weeks ago. So they play a very destructive role in almost every conflict in the Middle East. I don't think I can mention one where they don't play this role. And And it's the Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, that are their arms and legs in this. And here in the Swedish Parliament, we have taken a decision unanimously to ask our government to push the EU for putting IRGC on the list of terror organizations and sanctions through the regime of terror in the EU. Unfortunately, this is not so easy, of many reasons, interests in different other European countries, but also the fact that in the EU, this is very much a juridical process and not only a political decision as, for example, in the United States. So we push for this. The Swedish government is lifting it every time Iran is is discussed during the meetings with the Foreign Affairs Committee in the European Union. And we hope, and I think we'll see more and more countries also pushing for the same thing. I'm very happy to be here today to be able to listen to our distinguished panelists, and I think they will give us more knowledge and more ideas on how to work with these important questions as parliamentarians. But I also hope that there will be opportunity for many of you that come from the media side to have the opportunity to also showcase what's really going on. And it's not that the IRGC and Iran's regime is just trying to influence in the Middle East. It's also here. And Alireza have already mentioned a few of the terrible things they've done already here in Sweden, and this is something we can't accept. And I think this will be something that will be important for us. As you know, in this House, there's a lot of things going on, so there will be more MPs coming into the room after a while. I hope that we can make them feel welcome here when they come. But I think this could be my opening remarks, and I'm very happy to have our distinguished guest here, and I'm looking forward to listen to them. And I give the floor to our moderator, Oliver. So please introduce yourself and our panelists. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Magnus, and thank you, Alireza, first of all, for your opening words, but also for your kind hospitality. This is a topic that is extremely important also to us. My name is Oliver Bradley. I represent one of the partners of today's coming together of experts from the Europe-Israel Press Association and the European Jewish Association. Today's topic is not Israel, but indirectly it is, because it sits in the Middle East, and indirectly it is always, let's say, at the forefront of the fight with the proxies that has been mentioned concerning Iran. As European Jewish Association, we have a crisis in Europe today where life is not safe for Jews in Europe, including in Sweden. We have very specific cases where this has happened, friends of mine also. It needs to be addressed, and if parliamentarians don't address it, nobody will. Journalists, I really ask you to push the parliamentarians that don't address it, make them answer the questions why they are not confronting the topic of the enablement of a country that has been proven to be the enabler of terror throughout basically the world at the moment. So, first of all, my name, as I said, is Oliver Bradley of the European Jewish Association and Europe-Israel Press Association. I also want to thank my colleagues who are not here, who organized this, Ruth Daskapoulou Isaac, who also coordinated today's topic, as well as my colleague Rebecca Alouche, who is here from Paris, and my colleague David Kalfa, who has been also kind to invite the journalists that are here today. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists and then get straight to the topic. For those of you who would like to grasp sound bites, quotes, etc. from today's briefing. It is being recorded and it will be made available to you in the shortest time possible. So without further ado, let me introduce Edmund Fitton Brown. It was for me an extremely major honor to meet him because I've worked a lot with his colleague from the Counterterrorism Project, responsible in Germany. That is one of his many hats. He's a former diplomat from the United Nations, expert on the ISIL and Al-Qaeda Taliban sanctions monitoring team. He served as a coordinator of the team and is known for his expertise in the Middle East, regional security, and international counterterrorism. So this is a big problem that we are confronting right now, and keep it in mind that it is at our doorsteps as far as war goes. Ukraine is a part of it also. So anyway, David Lega is a friend of the European Jewish Association. He's also a member of the European Parliament, representing the Christian Democratic Party since 2019. He serves on the Committee of Foreign Affairs and the Committee for Human Rights. Human rights is a topic of this, and I think we will hear words about where the threat to, let's say, the liberties that we have gained after the Second World War are being threatened today. And to my right, it's a huge honor to again present Kasra Arabi. We've had him several times on tour in Paris and Rome and Berlin, etc. He is, let's say, a leading Iran expert, probably par excellence, in particular with a focus on the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. He has worked very hard on presenting a dossier which will show you also here in Sweden what the effects of Iran within Sweden are. He's a specialist, again, also in military affairs, security affairs, and Shiite extremism. So without further ado, I would say we will start probably with Edmund to give a brief statement. Then we'll go to Kasra, and then to David, and it will, of course, be followed with a Q&A. Again, thank you, everybody, for coming, and
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you all. It's a delight, as always, to visit Stockholm, and this is, for me, a great honor and unique occasion to speak at the Swedish Parliament. I'm going to emphasize the international context to this problem, the international threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran and by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. And I do want to stress that point. For convenience, I will often say Iran, just because it's the shortest way to refer to it, but I want to stress, that this is about the theocracy that has dominated and distorted one of the world's great cultures for the last 45 years. And so this is not something that is intended as any kind of slight against the Iranian people. This is very much about the Islamic Republic, the regime, and the Revolutionary Guards. So the Islamic Republic has defined itself in opposition to Israel, the United States, Europe, the wider West, since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. And over the course of nearly half a century of complex regional and global events, the hostility felt by the clerical regime, the determination to resist, has never abated, never once, never for a moment. Even when Iran sometimes finds itself naturally on the same side, for example, as the United States in a given conflict. When the American-led coalition invaded Iraq in 2003 with the purpose of driving out Iran's deadliest enemy, the Sunni Arab dictator Saddam Hussein, and with the partially articulated intention of giving Iraq's Shia majority the decisive voice in the country's government, it took Iran only a matter of weeks to start orchestrating the killing of American and British soldiers who were engaged in that endeavor. Nor did the common fight against Islamic State, or ISIS, again, I think I'll use ISIS as the convenient term, in the previous decade, in the 2010s, do anything to bring about reconciliation. Instead, we have witnessed the bizarre spectacle of Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah seeking to suppress an international pariah entity, whilst complaining endlessly about a parallel and complementary campaign being waged by NATO allies against that same pariah entity, ISIS. In explaining this paradox, we do well to remember that the Assad regime in Damascus did not always see ISIS as its main enemy. During the period of the Arab Spring, the existential threat to the Ba'athist regime was from popular demonstrations calling for democratic reform. And at that time, Assad colluded with ISIS to polarize the Syrian population and create a binary choice. You're either with the Alawite regime or you're with ISIS. And that policy was successful over several years. The Sunni opposition to Assad was progressively radicalized and until it became politic and safe for Tehran, Damascus, and Hezbollah to brand them as ISIS or Al-Qaeda and to fight them. Western efforts to curb Iranian aggression have been fitful over the years, despite extreme provocation. The taking of US embassy personnel as hostages in Tehran, the Rushdie fatwa, the killing of political opponents abroad, the Beirut bombing of 1983, harassment of international shipping, Hezbollah's campaign of terrorism overseas. Only when the US Treasury really turned up the heat after 2006, enforcing crippling sanctions in response to Iran's quest to develop a nuclear weapon, was Iran forced to compromise and sign the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to address international concerns about its uranium enrichment program. The problem was, and remains, that this response to the nuclear challenge, whether you consider the JCPOA a good or a bad deal on enrichment, and we can have a separate conversation about that, but this response left unanswered Iranian tactical asymmetric warfare in the Middle East. But events now, starting with October the 7th, the Hamas massacre in Israel, leave no doubt that Iran's building of its array of proxy militias in the region has now achieved strategic effect and significance. Now, obviously Hezbollah in Lebanon and its extensive international network is Iran's longest established, most prized, most reliable asset amongst these proxy allies. But Sunni governments in the Middle East have commented with increasing urgency since 2003 on how more and more Arab capitals were coming under threat or even control by Iranian proxies. The Houthi takeover of Sana'a and much of Yemen in 2014 to 2015, just as I was taking over as the British ambassador to Yemen, was a really important part of that development. And now, of course, we see the Houthis unsettling regional governments by their ostensible championing of the Hamas cause in Gaza by threatening international shipping in the Red Sea. And again, we can return to that in more detail if you would like later. But needless to say, the Houthi motivation here is far from altruistic and far from sincere. Baghdad has been governed by Iraqi Shia parties since Saddam was toppled, creating a constant challenge for Iraqi leaders to pursue national interests which require balanced international relations and security support from the United States, without being undermined by militias wedded to an Iranian agenda. And now again, since October the 7th, we see this challenge force American unilateral action to defend its forces against Iranian proxy attacks in Iraq and also in Syria and Jordan. The extremists then in turn exploit that US self-defense to escalate calls for the US forces to leave, creating a headache for the Iraqi Prime Minister, who is himself from the Shia, but understands that the loss of United States support would be a problem for Iraq. The campaign to get the Americans out takes no account of actual Iraqi national interests or of the past failure of Iraqi military forces to stand up to ISIS without international support. These Iranian proxies that I've referred to, they are in effect arms of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its Quds Force. And note that the I in IRGC stands for Islamic, not Iranian. It is Iranian-controlled, but it aspires to pan-Islamic influence. And this includes Shia proxies, like Hezbollah, and Sunni proxies, like Hamas. The so-called resistance agenda dominates Iran's strategy, which is why it is happy, since July 2021, to host the leader of al-Qaeda, Saif al-Adl, the head of the most notorious international Sunni terrorist network. Nor does Iran consider itself limited by international borders. The IRGC reaches out all over the world to increase its influence and undermine Western interests. The Islamic Center of England represents the supreme leader of Iran and has been involved in stirring up pro-Hamas and pro-Houthi activity on the streets of London. All organs of the Iranian state are dedicated to this relentless assault on Western interests, values, and allies. With the comprehensive victory over recent years of hardliners fanatically loyal to Ayatollah Khamenei, there is nobody in a position of power in Iran who can be addressed as an alternative. There is no institution in Iran that is able to stand against the demands of the regime and the IRGC. We therefore need to sanction and proscribe the most aggressive organs, starting with the IRGC, which has threatened and attacked perceived enemies of Iran on our streets. The British government has recently reaffirmed its unwillingness to proscribe the IRGC, but I have yet to hear a compelling reason not to do so. And the Labour Party, which will become the British government later this year, near certainly, has committed itself to proscription. It is time to raise the price for Iran of doing business the way it has chosen to over the past 45 years. Iran remains a rational actor. It does careful risk-benefit analysis before it acts, and we must change that analysis. Allow me to leave you with some thoughts going forward, and I'll be more than happy to expand on any of this information if you wish to ask questions about it. The IRGC is a violent organization with which it is not possible to engage constructively for diplomatic purposes. It has been involved in planning and executing attacks overseas, besides its subversive activities. Why should Western authorities allow it to continue to operate in this way? And Iran is now allied with Russia, a relationship that grew closer in their joint brutalization of the people of Syria, has evolved since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine into an axis of tyrannies, with Iran supplying Russia, as well as its other allies, with weapons to be used in indiscriminate attacks on civilians. We need to counter this aggression in a more determined and more systematic way. I appreciate that I've not spoken here directly about Sweden. That is more the area of expertise of my fellow speakers, so I'm happy to yield the floor back to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmund. I would say we should go straight then to Kazra, who maybe in his contribution, he might have an answer why we do not have the IRGC being proscribed. As a representative working with the United Against the Nuclear Iran, he's really devoted a lot of time into giving insight why Sweden perhaps really should take this seriously. Kasra.
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you to Alireza and Magnus for hosting us here today. So I want to start with outlining this investigation that Ioanni has conducted and is revealing, because it directly relates to Sweden. We have obtained a document from Iran, a strategic document that was signed in February 2021, a document that Swedish authorities were not aware of, that explicitly outlines, this is an agreement authorized by the Khamenei-led Supreme Council for Cultural Revolution, which is the highest authority for education and cultural affairs in Iran. It is a sanctioned entity for its role in the violent suppression of Iranian protesters during the Mahsa protests, its direct role for violently imposing the compulsory hijab on Iranian women. This document was overseen by the Supreme Council for Cultural Revolution. It is co-signed by the IRGC's Commander-in-Chief and other heads of the armed elements of the regime. It is also co-signed by the Ministry for Education and Higher Education and Science. And effectively what this document does is, quote, provides the IRGC with maximum access to Iranian universities and their international collaborations to procure research and technology for its military programs, specifically relating to the IRGC's soft power and hard power capabilities. And I want to emphasize on this point because, as I will outline this investigation further, obviously a lot of this stuff is focused on hard power capabilities. We undertook a similar investigation in the United Kingdom, and we proved that British universities were indirectly or directly providing sensitive research that was being used in the Iranian regime's drone program that was being used against Ukrainian civilians. But what I want to emphasize is that this is not just in relation to hard power technology or research. The regime, as per this strategic document, outlines the procurement of research for hard power, semi-hard power, and soft power. And when I emphasize soft power, this is absolutely critical because the research and technology that they are procuring, including stuff that's related to the humanities, social sciences, that directly feeds into the IRGC's soft war doctrines, the IRGC's psychological warfare doctrines to be used, take that research, incorporate it into their doctrines, and use it against the West for disinformation campaigns, misinformation campaigns, and for radicalization and propaganda purposes. So often, as I go into this investigation, you will hear university heads in the West say, oh, we've conducted our due diligence processes, what we're working on isn't considered dual use. Well, actually, this document proves final confirmation that any collaboration with an Iranian university, the IRGC, we can say, is using that. So what this document proves and what our investigation proves today is that the IRGC is specifically using Swedish universities to procure research and technology. Now, our investigation reveals that 8 of these collaborations exist. So there are 8 Swedish universities engaged in formal collaborations with Iranian universities. Not only are we concerned that the IRGC is proactively using these collaborations to procure research, but if you actually zoom in to the specific collaborations, in this document, the IRGC lists, quote, main science and technology priorities for defense and security. So in this document, they clearly outline, and it has a long list of research items. We can confirm that the collaborations that these 8 Swedish universities have with Iranian universities are specifically on topics and issues that are listed by as per this strategic document as being a main science and technology priority for defense and security. So what we have here is full proof, as I said, that the Revolutionary Guard is using Swedish universities to procure research and technology for its soft and hard power capabilities. Now, to add insult to injury, this specific document, as part of its objectives, states that not only does the Revolutionary Guard intend to use these collaborations, use Iranian universities to procure, and their collaborations with Swedish and other European nations, to procure research and technology for its hard and soft power, but its objective is to use that technology and research that they've used against their Western enemies, so procuring it from the West and then using it against them. That's specifically and explicitly outlined in this document. And we have a number of universities here: Chalmers University, Malmö University, and sorry if I pronounce this wrong, University of Borås, Lund University, Luleå University, Mid-Sweden University, Uppsala University, and Linnaeus University. These are the universities that have these existing partnerships with Iranian universities and are collaborating on specific issues that are listed as priorities for the IRGC. Now, as part of this, we have also evidenced, as part of this dossier, which is fully available on the UANI website, that as part of these collaborations, we have seen reciprocal visits to and from Sweden in, quote, academic exchanges. Now, I want to stress this point. No university in Iran is independent or private. All university heads are appointed directly by the Khamenei-led Supreme Council for Cultural Revolution, the same body that has put together this strategic document giving the IRGC maximum access to Iranian universities. The head of the Islamic Republic's Minister for Higher Education and Science is himself a member of the Professors Basij organization, the PBO, which is an arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The PBO has triggered a new, quote, cultural revolution in universities in Iran and has purged at least 115 professors in just the past 6 months. It is not only involved in gross human rights violations in Iran, but also abroad. Now, going back to that main point, no university in Iran is independent. And as part of the university structure and network in Iran, each university has a Herasat department. The Herasat is an arm of the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, which is proactively conducting the Islamic Republic's hostage diplomacy, including detaining Swedish nationals. Each university trip, if that's from Iran, is managed by the Herasat department, and each academic and student is required to report back on their engagements in a formal report back to the Herasat department. We have proved through this document, through this investigation, that there have been trips from Iranian universities to Sweden. So we know that the Herasat is fully engaged in that. On the other side, these reciprocal visits from Swedish universities, again, are closely managed by the Herasat department, the Ministry of Intelligence in Iran, whereby they proactively encourage Swedish academics and students to visit Iran and use that as an opening, as an opportunity to open dialogue, as an opportunity to find, quote, useful idiots that they can work on and individuals that they can build relationships and then later exploit. Again, our dossier proves that this is ongoing in Sweden. So we often think, as Magnus alluded to this and Alireza also highlighted it, as did Edmund, we often think of the IRGC and the Islamic Republic of Iran as a threat confined to the Middle East. This is a threat on our borders. This is a threat in our territory. The IRGC's model to gain access to European territory has always been through the development of a soft power infrastructure. In the Middle East, they are able to freely operate because they have militias pretty much everywhere in the region. If they want to conduct a hard power activity, whether that be surveillance, whether that be assassination, whether that be terrorist plots, it's much easier for them to operate. In Europe, however, they cannot easily access European territory. And this doctrine they have built has been over a long time, the militia doctrine. whereby they use the Islamic Republic of Iran's soft power capabilities, they develop a soft power infrastructure in Europe, whether that be through their mosques, religious centres, their community centres, etc., and university collaborations as a means to gain access to Europe. This started, by the way, in the immediate period after the Islamic Revolution, but also throughout the 1990s, for example, in the Bosnian War. Saeed Qasemi, a senior IRGC Quds Force commander, who, again, a Rouhani investigation proved was directly seeking to recruit and radicalize British students, Saeed Qasemi stated in the Bosnian War that they used the outfit of the Iranian Red Crescent Society to gain access, legitimate access to European territory, to train the Mujahideen forces, including Al-Qaeda, by the way. So the IRGC has used these soft power, what we deem as soft power collaborations, as an entry point to Europe. Why is this important? Because we know that the IRGC is conducting using these soft power infrastructures to conduct hard power operations, whether that be conducting surveillance, particularly against the Iranian diaspora and Jewish community in Europe, or whether that be conducting assassination and terrorist plots. And in the UK alone, there were more than 16 terror plots in 2022. So this issue is on our border. It must be taken seriously. And the thing to really emphasize here, to bring it back to the prescription of the IRGC, is the existing sanctions regime on the IRGC, the existing European sanctions regime on the IRGC, and this includes the United Kingdom, even though we have left the European Union, the existing sanctions regime does not prohibit the IRGC's soft power activities. It does not prohibit the IRGC's activities in relation to propaganda, in relation to cultural activities, in relation to ability to disseminate jihadi propaganda. Not only is the IRGC conducting direct terror plots in Europe, but it is using the same methods as ISIS and Al-Qaeda through their centres, through their soft power infrastructure, to recruit and radicalise and nurture homegrown Islamist Shia radicalisation and recruitment. We have proved these links across Europe. It's extremely concerning that the IRGC is now directly, we can prove, 100% exploiting these relationships, academic relationships, between Sweden and Iranian universities. And as I said, the existing sanctions regime does not prohibit this. Prescribing the IRGC would change this. It would curb the IRGC's ability to conduct soft power operations in European soil. So when you hear the arguments that prescribing the IRGC is just a symbolic move, when you hear Joseph Borrell say that, that's just a complete lie. This has practical consequences for the Revolutionary Guard's ability to function, and it also provides our local communities, our police force, our schools, with the necessary preventative tools to prevent against Shia and IRGC radicalisation. These are tools that do not currently exist, not least in the European Union's preventative programme. So, very happy to answer more specific questions in relation to the dossier, but the top line here is that the IRGC is using Swedish universities to procure research and technology for the Islamic Republic's military programs, not least its soft power and hard power capabilities. And the specific collaborations that exist are specifically listed as being main priorities for the procurement of research for the IRGC. So we have proved here that the IRGC is active in Sweden, and at the moment, the current sanctions regime does not prohibit this activity. Extremely alarming, taking place against the backdrop of rising IRGC terror plots in Europe, including Sweden. So I'll hand it over to Oliver, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, or at least some questions on the dossier. Thank you.
Thank you, Khazra. He mentioned Borrell, so let's just go straight into the European Union. We have the spokesman for the EEP Iran group here. David, I would say maybe we just get started as to what views and perspectives you can bring from Brussels to this conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, Oliver. And again, thank you both to Alireza and Magnus for organizing this. And a really large thank you to both of you, especially to you, Khazra, for showing this, because it shows that we have been too naive. I think in a way that we all hoped that the naivety stopped, but we find new ways and new means that we need to address. And I don't think we should place a lot of guilt. We just need to make sure that we stop it. So I hope that politically in the Swedish parliament, they will find unity to actually address this threat instead of passing the blame on different people, as sometimes, and especially in election times, people do. And since I'm not running again, I can dare to say that. But as you said, I am the EPP spokesperson for Iran. I am also the convening chair of the newly founded Abraham Accords networks within the European Parliament that works towards lasting peace in the Middle East, which we all know and hope for. But I really do hope that not only the politicians and the media here take these findings serious, but also that the Swedish university, all 8 of them, take it very seriously and try to stop their agreements and cooperation with the Iranian universities immediately. And now to what we have done. Just last month, the 25th of April, the European Parliament pushed and had their final resolution for the mandate, especially focusing on Iran. And there we pushed for a few things. Some of them we have pushed for before, and some of them are new. We pushed again for the full terror designation of the IRGC. And let me stop there for just 1 second, because this is not the first time that the European Parliament have pushed for and called for a sanction, a terror designation of the IRGC. We have done that several times, and unfortunately, it has been blocked and stopped by the High Commissioner, Josep Borrell, several times now. And when we look at the upcoming election, I would say that everything points to that also the next parliament will stand on the right side and continue to call for designations. But we do need a commissioner responsible of foreign affairs that will dare to see the Iranian regime for what they are, terrorists. And that's what we need to address as soon as possible. We also pushed for the full terror designation of Hezbollah in its entirety in this resolution, and we, for the first time, called for a full snapback on UN sanctions on Iran. And that's the way that we need to address it. Some people were discussing whether we should do this with conditions, like if all the other things don't meet, we should push for the snapback on sanctions. But what passed in the end is actually that the parliament called for a full UN snapback of UN sanctions right now. And that happened after the Iranian rocket attacks on Israel that happened just a few weeks ago, as we all know. That was the first time that Iran actually, in its own name, not using their proxies, deliberately fired so many rockets on Iran, which was all new. And just imagine what would have happened unless all these rockets weren't shot down. With the Partners of Peace, with the Abraham Accords network and several other European countries actively helping. So that was a huge step and a shift in the geopolitical situation that we have in the Middle East. Finally, what I would like to say is that I think that the European Parliament hasn't been naive for a few years when it comes to the threat that the Iranian regime has been towards their own people. We have put sanctions, we have been vocal when it comes to the discrimination and the brutality and the murders of the Iranian people. Not the least when my nomination now finally won the Parliament's liking, and we awarded the Sakharov Prize to the Mahsa Amini and the women of Iran for their fight for freedom. So that we have done and been secure on. What we have been too naive with has been the threat that Iran is posing on a global scale, including Europe. That is what Europe hasn't seen. And that has been a bit more visible after the Iranian-Russia collaboration, selling rockets, drones to Russia that has been used to kill Europeans. I think that it's a shame that it needed to come to that before we saw the threat that Iran has been facing on a global scale. But at least now we are more aware of it. Now we need to be less naive when it comes to infiltration. We need to see that China and Iran are doing the same thing. And hopefully we're coming there. Because, as my concluding remarks, I think we have seen or should have learned that going soft on regimes like Iran does not bring peace. It does not bring increased democracy. It does not bring more human rights. We should have learned that with Putin. And let's not do the same mistake again with Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, David. You said we should not have waited for Putin. I think 80 years ago, 70 years ago, we had Chamberlain with his naivete. Again, we shall have peace in our days, the appeasement. I mean, I'm here in Sweden. Sweden recently joined NATO. I mean, it's apparent that the experts in Sweden who have pushed for Swedish ascension to NATO will have had a reason for it. And I'm sure they know that it goes beyond Russia. It goes also towards the enablers of Russia. Iran is a primary enabler, China to some extent, but Iran, we have very, very concrete evidence. And this is what always astounds me, the naivete that one is talking about. But is it naivete? Is it just appeasement? This is one of the questions I would say, what can we actually do to convince the parliamentarians in the different countries in which United Against the Nuclear Iran is presenting dossiers, in which the counter-extremism project is showing also concrete evidence about the extremism that is happening within the countries, let's say working together and separately in your resource. What can we do to actually now convince parliamentarians to take this seriously and see Iran for what it is? And again, I think we should also highlight Iran as the leadership in Iran and not the people on the ground. So who wants to answer that question? What needs to be done right now to push this through?
Sure, thank you. I guess my first reaction to that question is to say that things happen in international affairs that shape the way we think, that change the context of the decisions that we take. And in that respect, the 7th of October last year has been in some ways a clarifying moment. I think it has, whilst it's absolutely possible to have a range of views on the way to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the way to revive a viable peace process on Israel and Palestine, the scale and the brutality of the Hamas attack clarified the nature of that organization in a way that was not, I think many people did understand it, but I would say widely in public and even amongst lawmakers, people didn't understand it fully, and perhaps they do now. And you then get something like the Houthi campaign in the Red Sea, which is claimed by the Houthis to be some kind of statement of support for the Palestinians, but of course is entirely unrelated to the situation in Gaza. It's something the Houthis have done before in the Red Sea, long before the events of the last 6 months. And you look at what the Houthis are actually doing. They're damaging the Egyptian economy by sabotaging the revenues of the Suez Canal. They're creating environmental damage by sinking ships in the Red Sea. They're preventing aid from reaching the Yemeni people through the port of Hodeidah. They're preventing food shipments from reaching Eastern African shores because it's difficult for ships to get through the Red Sea. And so what has happened, I guess, is that since the 7th of October, some of these things have just become a bit clearer. It's a bit clearer what this Iranian alliance is. It's not just Hamas, it's not just Palestinian Islamic Jihad, etc. It's not just Lebanese Hezbollah, it's not just the Iraqi resistance groups. It's also the Houthis. And of course, you know, we come back to that point about the long-standing Iranian association with Al-Qaeda. And so it's not that this was not known before, it's not that the information wasn't available, but a really epoch-making international event makes it possible to mobilize people on these issues. And I think in a domestic context, there's a parallel thing which is happening, which is the eruption of anti-Semitism in some European countries, certainly in Britain, certainly in the United States, sometimes on the streets, sometimes in the university campuses. And again, that's a clarifying thing. I mean, it's monstrous, it's shocking, but what it tends to do is it tends to unify decent people who say, no, this is intolerable. We thought we'd slay this dragon, and we will not tolerate this again. And so I think that's the point, that we have an opportune moment to win this argument.
I would just add, completely agree with Edmund's assessment there. I would add that this issue is a matter of urgency confronting the Islamic Republic on all fronts. And I say this because, particularly in the next 9 months, ahead of a potential new administration in the White House, if you observe the domestic changes that Khamenei has been spearheading since 2019 as part of his new manifesto, the second phase of the Islamic Revolution, this is the single most important document that Khamenei has produced, according to his power-hungry son, Mujtaba. And effectively, this project that began in 2019 has sought to complete his personalization of power and ensure that his hardline Islamist ideology now lives in. He's 85 now. And as part of this second phase manifesto, he launched a, quote, purification process that has sought to give rise to a new political, military and bureaucratic class. In essence, the so-called Javan va Hezbollah class, the young and Hezbollah class, ideologically extreme class. Effectively, what this has created is empowered the most radical young Khamenei absolutists across all key positions of power, whether that be political power, through the appointment, for example, I say de facto appointment of Ebrahim Raisi, through the consolidation of the IRGC, which is regarded by Khamenei as the main pillar of the Islamic Revolution, and through cleansing the so-called bureaucratic class with the rise of the Imam Sadegis, the Islamic Republic's indoctrinated technocrats. The reason I'm providing this analysis and backdrop is that this cohort, the rise of this cohort, has removed the final traces of meritocracy in the Islamic Republic. And there really was no meritocracy that existed in the regime, very limited number. But what this has done is replaced the old cohort of experienced, some of whom were educated in the West, of bureaucrats, diplomats, thought strategists, with a new cohort of ideologically zealous, inexperienced and largely incapable figures across the regime. This has directly impacted the calculus of the Islamic Republic because it has made the Islamic Republic much more aggressive. It has made the Islamic Republic much more reckless. And as a result, and we can draw the lines here, the regime in Iran has made many strategic errors. This process has taken, and one of them, the obvious one being the direct attacks on Israel. But we've got more than that. We've got more than 170 attacks on US forces in the Middle East, including killing 3 US forces. We had direct ballistic missile attacks against Pakistan. This new cohort in Iran are incapable of reading the rules of the international order and how to respond. Now, why is this so important? Well, A, it's important because it's increased their recklessness, and that recklessness, by the way, is including operations in Europe conducting and getting caught red-handed 007 style, assassination plots on European soil, including, by the way, stabbings in London. My own best friend, Puri Zarati, British Iranian journalist, was stabbed a few weeks ago by operatives of the Islamic Republic. So this issue is not confined just to the Middle East. It's reached our borders in Europe. But on top of that, this has taken place, the rise of this new cohort has taken place at a time when the US really has lost deterrence in the Middle East. And as a result, there is a lot of chatter in Iran, there is a lot of chatter amongst the Supreme Leader circles, amongst the IRGC senior command, that now, the next 9 months, may be the best time to weaponize the nuclear program and escalate on all fronts, including support for Putin's war in Ukraine, before a potential new administration in the White House. So there is added urgency to take action against the Islamic Republic in these next 9 months. A lot of observers, and I think governments, were very keen to comment after Israel's retaliatory strike that this was the end, this was the escalation. Actually, I think the opposite is true. Things are just starting to begin. We are faced with an extremely volatile next 9 months. Expect the Islamic Republic to escalate on all fronts, and really the European Union and the European nations have a key role here in curbing the IRGC's ability, A, to operate in Europe through the prescription of the IRGC and terrorist organisation, but B, through other mechanisms. All the structural factors, I'll end on this point as well, in Iran, all the structural factors that led to the nationwide protests in 2022, obviously the murder of Mahsa Amini was the trigger to bring people on the streets, but there were deep-rooted structural factors from the economy, from political repression, from the environment, from water security, etc. All those structural factors in the past 12 months have got worse. Now, again, this irrational, this illogical cohort that are now at the helm, they believe that now is the best opportunity to unleash a new wave of domestic Islamization. So they're increasing political suppression. So in Iran, in the next few months, at least in the near future, expect to see a new wave of anti-regime protests take place. And again, the European Union, the European nations need to be on the front foot. We're about to enter an extremely volatile 9 months, in my view.
So we'll take, again, David wants to comment, and then we'll start to take questions.
Yeah, there's not much to add after these two brilliant comments, but quickly, I think because you also asked what we can do now, how can we continue, and we need the media's help. Push actively on our lead candidates for the European elections and force them to take a stand. Do you stand for a terror designation? If not, why? And actually make sure that it happens in the beginning of next mandate, because nothing will happen before the elections, and hopefully after the committees have been shaped and formed in the beginning of September. So I think that's important. What we need to do is strengthen the transatlantic link. We need to work closer together with the US, regardless of their election, regardless of who wins. We need to make sure that we are more in sync than we have been over the past years. I think that's another key to make sure that this happens, because one of the most dangerous things that can happen right now is that Europe will focus on Russia, US will focus on China, and no one will really pay attention to Iran. That's what they're hoping for. So we need to make sure that we see these together and that we work together with the other democracies, with the United States, to make sure that we address the threats. Because also the usual comments when it comes to the collaboration between these three is that they have nothing in common. Why would they work together? They are have completely different ideologies. But we all know, so did Nazi Germany and Japan. They had nothing else in common than hate. And that's why we need to take it seriously. Thanks.
Thank you, David. So I will start taking questions, and the gentleman in the second row.
Thank you very much. My name is Fredrik Malm, chairing the Committee on Education here in Riksdagen, and thank you very much, Alireza and Magnus, for organizing this and bringing this such distinguished panel also here to Parliament. I have 3 questions. I will try to put them very concrete. The first one is, when you wrote the report, did you look into these bilateral agreements Sweden signed with Iran, cooperation agreements in 2017, I think it was, or 2018 maybe, and also the MOU, which was signed, because it includes some of the higher education cooperation, and if those agreements have had any impact or consequences, if it makes it easier, for example, for the Iranian regime to pick persons who can study in Sweden according to these agreements. The second question is it possible, if, well, there is need of political will, but also I'm not an expert on this sanction regulations and laws and so on, but is it possible to also block family members of the sanctioned persons or the regime elite in Iran from entering our universities, for example, here? And my third question is, is the main problem here for the higher education system in Sweden that Iranian students can come in and, for example, do a PhD study in nuclear physics or something like that, and that they go after technology or science data or so, or is it more a broader problem that they can infiltrate the Swedish society in this way to for example, monitor or spying on Iranian dissidents in Sweden, opposition groups, or organizing terror cells and so on? Is it more you look at it as this broader problem, or is it that we need to look into some specific things within the higher education system in Sweden in order to better protect, for example, science results and so on? Thank you very much.
Sure, very good questions. In terms of the, I'll go backwards. So broader problem, is it being used to infiltrate Swedish society, for example, to conduct surveillance, et cetera, or is it specific to just the procurement of the research? It's actually both. So again, the document that we have obtained and published explicitly outlines, confirms, period. There is no denying now that Swedish universities and any collaboration with an Iranian university, the IRGC has, quote, maximum access to, and that's to procure this research and technology. So in terms of the actual research and technology, we can confirm that that is definitely happening. And again, this is specifically for the journalists here, but also yourself as a committee for education, it's something that needs to be directly addressed with university chancellors and university heads, because in their response, I mean, we are waiting for responses, but in previous times when we've flagged these issues, the response has either been, we weren't aware of this, or we conduct our due diligence processes and we assessed as part of these due diligence processes that it was safe to conduct this relationship. Well, again, this document 100% states that that relationship is being used by the Revolutionary Guard and other armed elements of the regime. So there's, on the research front, we can be absolutely sure. And on the other side, we know, as I said, that the IRGC and other armed elements of the regime use these collaborations as entry points into Sweden, as entry points into European soil. So if, and we have proven again, there are delegation visits, again, we've proven that through these, for our investigation, we can be sure that there's certainly, with absolute certainty, that the Ministry of Intelligence is involved in that, because, as I said, the Herosat network controls those delegations. It specifically, each individual will have to report back to them. They're also very careful in selecting who is sent abroad. So, in answer to that last question, the final question, yes to both. And we have enough evidence to prove that. So there needs to be swift action. And I think one of the urgent calls, I would say, that is required is for the Ministry of Education to do a full investigation into the status of partnerships between Swedish and Iranian universities, because there may be more. Our investigation has proven that 8 collaborations exist. In relation to, is it possible to block family members of these IRGC commanders, I think one method, and you're absolutely right to highlight this, because there are specific allocation slots that the regime gives to members of armed paramilitary student organization bodies to study abroad. So we know that. So for example, every university in Iran has a student Basij organization. The student Basij organization is the Revolutionary Guard's paramilitary at universities in Iran. They are directly involved in human rights violations in Iran, including brutally suppressing and killing students. As part of, they also carry out indoctrination, radicalization activities, and have also, by the way, stated their intent to, for example, they did this again recently, but they've done this in previous times as well, have produced a list of names, volunteers from the student Basij as suicide bombers to go into Israel and conduct terrorist activities. So the Student Basij organization, which I'm pleased to say was sanctioned by the European Union after we published our research on it, the Student Basij organization is entrenched across all Iranian universities, and as part of a reward for these members, they get priority for allocations to study abroad. And that includes in European and Western universities. There have been multiple cases, including in America, including Australia, and including in the European Union, where individuals who are directly linked to this IRGC paramilitary force have gained access, particularly when we look at master's and PhD programs. So again, that's absolutely something that we need to be aware of. I would say that the model of a task force, for example, that has been used to counter Russian oligarchs, elites, and their proxies in relation to Ukraine is a model that I have certainly been recommending to policymakers, is a model that we really, that's low-hanging fruit. That's low-hanging fruit, and again, this goes back to European security. So that is something that should be explored, and it should be an absolute priority. We should absolutely prevent IRGC commanders' sons, daughters, the so-called Aghazades, the noble-born as we call them in Farsi, gaining entry to European cities because they come here, they live lavish lifestyles on corrupt regime money. And finally, these cooperation agreements, the 2017 agreement, the thing to note is, again, to go back to both your points, the way the Europeans approach this, and in many ways are still approaching this, I say European governments, not parliamentarians, is the same factors that led us to misread Putin, be that naivety, misinformation, disinformation, and selective hearing, are the same ones we are employing, and I say we, I mean the European governments, are employing against Khamenei's regime. These collaborations, these cooperation agreements that were signed in 2017, I'm sure on the European side they were done in goodwill, but that goes back to the naivety and believing that they can somehow influence the Islamic Republic's domestic politics, which is, is completely flawed, as we saw with Putin in Russia. So these agreements, yes, any agreement, any collaboration, any formal agreement, we know as part of this document, certainly since February 2021, is being exploited by the Revolutionary Guard and will make it much easier for these relationships and collaborations to exist. Not least, by the way, because universities themselves will point to these collaborations as, strong reasoning as to why they should have this kind of relationship with an Iranian university. So yes, please do press the Swedish Department for Education on this, and also university chancellors, because they have a role, not least, obviously to protect their research for intellectual property, but also for their students. Facilitating delegation trips to Iran at a time when the IRGC is proactively detaining Swedish nationals hostage is something that is extremely alarming. So yes, please do raise this with them, and obviously here to support in any other way.
The gentleman over there, please.
My name is Nasser Baladei, and thank you very much for these informative speeches and research. I was thinking about, because I'm from Baluch minority in Iran, and member of the UNPO. UNPO did a research, they are just doing a follow-up, they contacted me today, that Iranian authorities has targeted national minority members in the European countries. For instance, I myself have been one of those. I don't know if you have taken or read that report on compromised space. It's not only about Iran, it's about from China, Russia, Pakistan, but mostly in Iran, because Iran has been the country that has been mostly active against these national minorities abroad, particularly in Europe. And I just wanted to ask if you have got any information about that or not. And some of the people that have been killed have been from national minority, for instance, from the Kurdish minorities, both in Sweden, in Germany, and in Austria, and are still continuing.
I can try to answer. We know that Islamic Republic has blood on their hands. They have been conducting terrorist activities both within European soil but also around the world. I think a couple of weeks ago, Argentinian court pointed out Islamic Republic as a terrorist state. And we also know that the minority groups are especially pointed out, and but this topic is not specifically part of this research. We have done another research. We had an event in the Swedish Parliament last September that we are conducting the financial trades with Islamic Republic and the Swedish company's role in that part. So we do several investigation with UANI, and we try to pinpoint the different aspects. And Fredrik, you're right, the trip 2017 was a failure, to be mild, and that opened up a lot of possibilities for the Islamic Republic to gain access to the Swedish society.
And just briefly, in the European Parliament, we had several urgency resolutions on many of these groups, persecuted, but also named special individuals. So you can go back over the last 5 years and find many resolutions that we mentioned this. Also in collaboration with other organizations that represent different minorities, like Open Doors.
And just to add very quickly, I mean, this regime is anti-Iranian. This regime, especially against all minority groups, against all religious minorities, but against the majority as well. Okay, they are anti-Iranian. And what I would note is that this wave of suppression that we're witnessing, and we're about to witness a new wave of suppression, will target everyone. It is specifically targeting Iranian women and young men. And the situation, as I said, all those structural factors that led to the nationwide protests in Iran in 2022, they have got worse in the past 12 months. So expect anti-regime unrest in Iran, and specifically in relation to the Baluchis as well. We see that when the Islamic Republic conducted those ballistic missile attacks against Pakistan, paradoxically, and Pakistan struck back, that targeted again the Baluchis in Iran, and it should be noted that that was completely aligned with Khamenei's objectives. Baluchistan has been one of the pulses of the Iranian people's revolution against the Islamic Republic. People in Baluchistan have said that, and Kurdistan have said, from Baluchistan to Kurdistan, we give our lives for Iran. So part of the regime's strategy has been to divide and conquer and cause these divisions among Iranian people, exploit these divisions, but it has failed. And I think the Iranian people are united again from Kurdistan to Baluchistan. They have one common enemy, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran. But as I said, expect moving forward, we're already witnessing this new wave of suppression, and B, that the Iranian people will be back on the streets. And we have to ask ourselves, in 2022, I remember speaking to policymakers in the months before, and again, all the visible signs were there. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. I gave evidence to the Canadian Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, and I said, look, all the signs indicate, if you zoom in the coming months, there will be mass nationwide protests. Is Canada ready? And I ask the same question now in Sweden. I ask the same question to the European Union. We know all the visible signs indicate that there will be protests on the same scale as 2022 in the coming months. Is the European Union ready? Is the European Union, does it have the measures in place to actually provide A, practical support to the Iranian people, and B, A and B are linked together, limit the bloodshed? That's a question I would raise. Obviously, David pointed to the European elections. I think that will be a critical moment. I'd be keen to get your thoughts. I know you said you are stepping down. I'd be keen to get your thoughts on potential lineups for Borrell's succession, or whether that is something that the Europeans are considering, and how that would impact the European Union's overarching policy. Because I will say here that in my own engagements with parliamentarians, actually parliamentarians have been largely supportive. They've been everyone here is on the same page. It's the ministries and the governments across Europe that have been the barrier. So.
I think that, unfortunately, we don't only look at the position of the High Representative representing foreign affairs. It will be included in the package with the President of the Commission, the President of the Parliament. So before we have an election result, it will be hard to see where it's going, unfortunately. But I do think that we will have a stronger parliament on these issues, both in the support of the Jewish people of Israel, of the people of Iran, and against the regime. That every indication looks towards that. What we need to make sure is that our candidates in each country are aware of the threat that Iran is posing now, because negotiation starts the evening after the elections. So now is the time to do it. Now is the time to push and get answers for it. But I mean, we have a regime that plans assassinations on Swedish soil, that infiltrates our universities, that imprisons our citizens without trials, or if there are trials, they are sham trials, and we are hesitant whether to designate them. I mean, for me, it's completely unbelievable. It needs to happen now, and we need to continue to push Borrell to do it.
I think this also brings to the question: how many people have to leave Europe before one wakes up that there is a massive problem in Sweden? There have been several cases of Swedish citizens who have left Sweden because they felt threatened here by IRGC operatives who were, from my understanding, just deported but not prosecuted. And when you have to leave your home country to go to a country that is associated with you, a Jewish lady here in Sweden went to Israel. She feels safer there. That means there is a problem at home. And then, there was from Edmund, he was focusing also, Kazra, a bit of, we have all these examples outside of the borders of the European Union. When are we going to wake up as to what's happening here? But actually it has happened here. And Sweden does have a reputation, in Malmö particularly. It is at home. So the question is, how many people have to leave? How many minorities have to leave until they feel safe here?
And if I can just amplify that point, Iran International TV, have been told in Britain that they can't be, they're not safe. The British authorities telling them that they're not safe and they can't protect them, and them having to look at moving to the United States. I think we have a problem we have to deal with immediately.
I mean, for many months now, we had advice from the Jewish religious leaders in our congregations not to wear their Star of David, not to wear their kippah outside. Incredible in Sweden, and we need to realize that this is also a part of Iran's plan. And I think all of Jewish communities in Sweden are right now bracing themselves in preparations of the Eurovision coming this week to see what's going to happen on the streets of Malmö. So this will be important to see how that is handled and to see how the Swedish communities and people are standing up. And we have an easy way to face the anti-Semitic hate. We have the IRA definition. We need to adopt it, and we need to make sure that also the universities, the organizations, the federations are working with the same, because when things like that happen, we cannot have a discussion about, is this anti-Semitism or not? We need to have that same plan to make sure that we are looking at it the same way. Then we can face actions. Because if the debate will stop on whether this is anti-Semitic hate or not, we will come nowhere.
But of course, it's affecting a lot of other communities too. Any other questions here from are...
Thank you. Coming back to what you said, Gasra, about the report and the collaborations, could you mention, have you seen anything about the fields of collaboration between the universities, and can you see if there is any connection to the JCPOA agreement, the nuclear energy agreement, if there are those kind of links? And the second thing I would like to ask you, if you could elaborate a little bit more about what would happen if the EU would put IRGC on their terror listing. What would that mean in practice? Thank you.
In terms of the collaborations, as I said, that the nature of these collaborations are specifically listed, and I quote, as main science and technology priorities for defense and security, end quote, for the regime and the IRGC as part of this strategic document. Now, there are specific universities here that will, naturally these corporations have dual use purpose, and others that are, as I said, towards the more softer end of the spectrum, which is still, by the way, as per this strategic document, of interest and a science and a research priority. So, for example, we've got Chalmers and Shiraz University, we've got Advanced Electronics, Energy and Cyber Electronics, Malmo and Charbahar Maritime University, we've got collaborations on guidance and navigations, logistics and vehicles and infrastructure, the University of Boras and Babel, we've got process engineering, chemical engineering, again, both of which are dual use, as they have a military purpose as well, can be used for military purposes. Lund University, we have geology, computer processing, environmental science. Loyola University, economic security, food and agriculture, energy, environmental science. Mid Sweden University, economic security, food and agriculture, energy, environmental. Uppsala University, geology, physical sciences and environmental sciences. And then Linnaeus University, biology and health, food and agriculture and environmental sciences. As I said, some of those on the list appear to not be dual purpose, at least upon first glance, but all the things I mentioned are specifically listed as being priorities for the Revolutionary Guard as per this strategic document. So those are the nature of the relationships and the collaborations. In terms of the practical consequences of prescription, so as I said, the current sanctions regime does not prohibit the IRGC's ability to disseminate jihadi propaganda, to conduct soft power activity or cultural activity on European soil, and as well as conducting direct terror plots, specifically targeting, by the way, European citizens that are part of the Jewish community and the Iranian diaspora community, as well as conducting direct plots. They are also seeking to nurture homegrown radicalization, homegrown extremism and homegrown terrorism through their centers, but also through these collaborations, as well as procuring research. Now, unlike ISIS al-Qaeda, the current sanctions regime does not prohibit this. So prescribing the IRGC would fundamentally change this. Prescribing the IRGC would give the Swedish government, would give European governments, technology companies, civil society organizations, a full mandate to prohibit any activity related to the Revolutionary Guard, be it soft power activity for radicalization, or be it procuring research. This would be akin to doing a research collaboration with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah. In the United Kingdom, for example, we have prescribed Hezbollah in its entirety as a terrorist organisation. I always say this to British members of Parliament and also British authorities. All those efforts to prohibit and undercut Hezbollah's ability to disseminate jihadi propaganda in London, to obtain illicit funds, all those efforts are undercut so long as its creator, its founder, its main supporter, ideologically, militarily, financially, and in terms of jihadi propaganda, is not on the list of prescribed groups. Beyond that, it provides our local communities with the necessary tools to take preventative steps against Shia radicalization, IRGC radicalization, which is happening on European soil. We have identified IRGC radicalization propaganda anthems targeting European children, and I mean children. We're talking between the ages of 6 to 12. whereby they attest their willingness to become martyrs in the path of Khamenei, and fight in the so-called apocalyptic army that will return with the coming of the so-called hidden imam to eradicate Jews worldwide. This activity is ongoing. The only way to curb it is through prescribing the IRGC. So the IRGC prescription is not just symbolic, although symbolism is important here, but it also has practical consequences. And that's why the IRGC is also particularly nervous about it, and that's why the Islamic Republic is using all means necessary to prevent this from happening. I think the hesitation in part is, well, if we do this, what if it makes the situation worse? Well, what if they start conducting terror operations? They are already conducting terror operations. I mean, that rationale, would we apply that with ISIS or Al-Qaeda? Would we say, oh, we shouldn't put ISIS or Al-Qaeda on the list, because if we do, it might make it worse? This is about protecting Swedish national security, European national security first and foremost, and then thinking about the foreign policy kind of aspect of this. This is first and foremost a domestic issue, and it should be treated as such. So many practical consequences for the IRGC, and something that can really protect, particularly, as I said, my community, the Iranian community, and the Jewish community across Europe, because our two communities certainly do not feel safe in Europe, which is quite shocking.
I would be curious to know how many of these 8 universities have adopted the IRA definition on anti-Semitism. That might be a good start, perhaps, also. Are there any other questions here? So, unless any of our gentlemen...
Before, just one point on this has come up in the session, the nature of this Russia-Islamic Republic of Iran collaboration. And this collaboration has often been depicted as a marriage of convenience, but it's certainly moved on from this. I would say it's a marriage of ideas, not ideologies. They have completely different ideologies, but they are united on certain ideas, confronting the West and the US, overturning the liberal international rules-based order, and targeting liberal values in the West. And we see this playing out in the culture wars, for example, etc., etc. This nature of this relationship is certainly being upgraded. Khamenei is definitely using this opportunity to deepen that relationship because he views that the world order is changing. This was an ideological rationale for supporting Putin's war in Ukraine, because they perceive that war as being the collapse of the West. The danger is, and we've seen the IRGC really deepen its relationship with the Russian military forces, if this trend continues, it's no longer, it's likely, at least highly likely as well, I would say now at this point, that we will see collaborations between the IRGC and Russia in the military sphere that we're already seeing, but in terms of intelligence sharing and Russia gaining access to Iranian regime proxies, getting access to Iranian regime militias, to use them to target Western interests, to target the West, with enough plausible deniability to avoid any consequences. There was a very noticeable trip where a senior Hamas delegation, after October 7th, visited the Kremlin at the same time as a visit by a senior delegation of the Iranian regime, among them affiliates of the Revolutionary Guard. So this area, the trajectory of this relationship is extremely worrying. And if, in many ways, we often talk about whether Putin would use nuclear weapons or not, very serious threat, we should consider that. But there is also another threat here of Russia and the Islamic Republic of Iran collaborating, Russia gaining access to this network of militias, which isn't confined in the Middle East, it's also present in Africa, and to conduct attacks on Western interests and positions with enough plausible deniability to avoid any consequences. So that's a real threat here.
Yes, if I could add to that, I mean, I think this, as we've said, that a lot of Iran defines itself in opposition to the West, and Russia defines itself in opposition to the West. And so you have, as Kasra described it, a sort of a coming together of interests there and of ideas. And one of the most troubling global developments in recent years has been the collapse of governance in the Sahel, in that band of desert area that spans across Africa from east to west. And We've seen coups increasing numbers of coups d'etat taking place in those countries. And if you look at what's happening currently in Niger, there is a clear common cause between the Russians and the Iranians in displacing Western influence and displacing even United Nations advice, offering easy solutions. We will provide support with no questions asked. We will help you to kill your target list rather than worry about whether your oppressive measures and your poor governance is actually just making the problem worse. All we ask in return is that we can get access to your uranium deposits or your other natural resources. And of course, neither Russia nor Iran cares at all about what kind of wreckage they're going to leave behind in those countries. This is destined to fail as a counterterrorism strategy. It's destined to leave Niger with an increased terrorist problem and probably with a succession of coups and succession of casualties. And Iran and Russia will happily walk away, leaving that wreckage behind for other people to deal with.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ali Reza.
So, Oliver, David, do you want to have some closing remarks also before?
No, I just want to thank also for this conversation. I think it's important that we have it together and that we make sure that we move things forward. Just quickly on what Kasra said on symbolism, I couldn't agree more. Symbolism is important. When we awarded the Sakharov Prize to Mahsa Amini and the women of Iran, the regime forbade Mahsa Amini's parents to come. They weren't allowed to take part, and when they returned through the lawyer with the award and the prize money, the regime stole the award and confiscated the money. Why would they do that unless it mattered? It's as simple as that. So would the terror designation of the IRGC. It would matter to the Iranian people. They would know that we see them and continue, especially in the coming months, as Kasra said. Thank you.
So, 95 minutes. Thank you for your patience. I know that you probably want some coffee and cake. In Sammanbindningsbana we will have it, but just a couple of minutes of closing remarks. I start with Kasra. Thank you very much, Kasra, for your fantastic research within UANI. I am pleased to be a small part of the advisory board for UANI since last year, and collaborate with you. You have always been a strong voice for freedom and for human rights and for the safety and security in a better world. Edmund, I hadn't had the pleasure to meet you before, but I'm really grateful that you took your time and came from Austin and shared your knowledge with us. I think that in this complex issue, it's important both with experience and knowledge about how these complex pieces are tied together. And David, I'm really sorry that you are not going to be in the European Parliament. I know that you have been a really strong voice in the European Parliament for the Iranian freedom voices. So thank you very much for everything you have been doing as a parliamentarian. We are really grateful. Oliver, thank you for this moderation. And I can try to close with some personal remarks. This seminar is not about me or Magnus or anybody here on the panel. It is about Swedish security. This is what me and Magnus as parliamentarian for the Swedish Parliament need to do. Make sure that Swedish people are safe, that Sweden are safe, that our taxpayers' money are used as it should be. And next Tuesday, Minister for Higher Education, Mats Persson, is coming to the Parliament to answer what he's going to do about this situation with the universities. But I also hope that the journalists in this room and other people interested in this complex issue do your part. Because we have a saying in Farsi, one hand doesn't make any sound, it's difficult to, but it means that we need to work together. If we want to have change, we need to do things together. And I have a message from the people inside Iran. Every week, almost every day, I receive messages from people inside Iran who are thankful to us to amplifying their voices for freedom. And in my perspective, I don't have any doubt at all that the only thing that they want is to be able to enjoy the same level of freedom that we enjoy in this country and in Europe. And we know, we have the result, 10% of the Iranians participated in the parliamentarian election. This regime doesn't have the internal support. And I also want to emphasize one more thing. The designation of IRGC is not a juridical issue, it's a political issue. It has been a political issue from day one. We have given legal documents to the Council, to the European Commission, that show this is a strictly political issue. And hopefully, after this election, we will have a new commissioner who takes this issue seriously. Thank you for your participation, and we are really grateful that you showed up today and has taken this matter seriously. Thank you very much.